In the chapter 1 of Ephesians, in the Bible, chapter 1 of Ephesians, it says that I am chosen, that God loves me so very much that Christ gave his life for me, John 3:16, and that I have been purchased with a price, and that I am a child, a son of the Most High God. In learning this lesson, and in learning the three-prong attacks from the world, the flesh, and the devil, and that God has already given us all of the provisions that we need to stand in the battle, I was able to completely overcome. I became free, and it was the truth that set me free.
To everyone celebrating Transgender Day of Visibility, I want you to know that your president sees you.
You're not willing to say absolutely minors shouldn't be making decisions to amputate their breast or to amputate their genitalia.
Like, I went to a school board here in Tampa and I spoke about a book called This Book is Gay.
And I am a 17-year-old detransitioner from the Central Valley.
I feel like
I was medically transitioned from
in a woman's body. I love men. I love every
students, and those are
increase in suicide
the
rates
transgender
among
community in the
validity
United
of
States.
gender-affirming care.
Two genders, male and female.
The nation's first
child.
This bill is to protect children, to keep them from transitioning until they're at least 18 years of age. And I'm on my way there to testify to keep the children from going down the path that I went down. It's a huge mistake. My name is Burleigh. When I was in the first grade, there was one morning for which I was standing in front of the school, and I was wondering where I belonged. And when I was wondering, a thought came into my mind that God made a mistake, I'm a girl. I struggled with that thought for many years. Summer between the 5th and 6th grade, and the summer league diving coach sexually abused me. So not only did I have this thought that God made a mistake, I was a girl, I developed this hatred of my male genitalia as well. And I kept this secret too for a number of years. As a result, I was withdrawing from others. I was more of a recluse, but I had to deal with these issues somehow.
I was having issues at school. I just was not doing very well mentally. I was severely depressed and anxious. I was also being preyed upon and exploited online, and as a result of that, I ended up really having a hatred towards both myself and my body. And I ended up going into what is essentially the day version of a mental hospital. And while I was there, I had expressed to them that hey, I think maybe this is a gender issue. And it just, as soon as I brought that up, like my other issues were kind of pushed to the side and it was just focused on that.
What I have learned from talking with transitioners and detransitioners is that a lot of our confusion, what people would say gender confusion, actually stems from childhood hurts and pains and traumas.
There's a long list of comorbidities they normally have, whether that be like ADHD, autism, depression, anxiety, you know, physical stuff like obesity, all these things where it's just, these people aren't healthy and they're not being given the treatments they need for all these other things. Instead, they're being pushed down a path that's going to make them like less healthy.
So I learned that a way to move the pain out of my mind and into my body was to work out as hard as I could. And the really good thing was I was usually so tired at night that I went straight to sleep. I had no time for these thoughts to occupy any space within my mind. And so my coping mechanism worked pretty well. And even in college, when I went to college, I would be struggling with these thoughts. And since I lived just off campus, sometimes at 9, 10 o'clock at night, I'd go running around the LSU lakes as hard as I could to move the pain out of my mind and into my body. And then I could study and go to bed. That went on for a number of years. When I was in the latter part of my undergraduate degree, I met a girl and I fell in love. Love is such a powerful emotion, and that love, that emotion actually blew the door off of my emotional closet. But in falling in love, my coping mechanism no longer helped me to deal with the thought that I was having, my hurts and pains. It was at that point for which I let the third person in my life know about my difficulties, and that was the girl I fell in love with. She shared with me that, Billy, if you're working to overcome this problem and to remain male, I want to be with you. But she didn't want to know anything about my difficulties. She did not want to walk beside me through my problems and help me with my problems. I went to therapy, and in therapy, I tried to deal with what was going on in my mind. In therapy, I very much remember there were many times for which I'd just, instead of sitting on the couch, I would actually be sitting on the floor with a pillow to my chest, just crying, why is this happening to me? What is going on in my mind? So we got married. I brought a whole lot of luggage and baggage into that marriage, and that marriage lasted 3 years. It was after 3 years we divorced. Therapy wasn't helping me. I wasn't resolving any of the problems within my mind. So since I was a student at LSU, I went to the Middleton Library and tried to do my own research. What the research was showing, what they were finding, was that the only way to be happy was to change your body to match your mind. The way that I chose was to believe the information that was being given to me, that I should transition. So I went to my therapist and I told her that I needed to transition. She came and she gave me a big hug, and she told me, Billy, I knew that you were going to reach this decision one day, but I didn't think it would take this long. And after that appointment, she gave me a letter to take to an endocrinologist, a doctor in New Orleans, for testosterone blocker, spironolactone, and also for estrogen, estradiol. That's when I started my journey, and I was about 27 years old-ish at that point. And so I was on estrogen and a testosterone blocker for 3 to 4 years. I was on this road to my happiness, to my peace, to my joy.
With gender dysphoria, you were really only given the option of like, okay, medical transition. No one's really working with you to find maybe the root cause of why you're having these issues, or like dealing with the other things going on in your life either. It's pretty much like, all right, hormones, surgery, that's what's gonna fix it. So we're just gonna push you straight down that path as quick as we can. That was just like, when I brought up the gender issues, that was really the only path that was laid out for me, was like any form of medical transition. That led to me beginning to do things like I cut my hair off. I started like binding my chest to kind of hide it. And then from there, that led to the first medical intervention that I ever had, which was a double mastectomy at 16.
What I've learned on this journey is that absolutely every person is looking to satisfy the needs of acceptance, significance, and security. The world only offers temporary solutions at best. The world offers all of these definitions for satisfying these needs.
And so when it comes to this sexual content, then you are basically making kids a part of one of these groups. So you do have acceptance, you do have inclusivity in one of these groupthink type of models, and because of that you can control them, because the social pressures of being outside of one of these groups is so strong that it makes them incredibly enticing to want to join.
The whole gender thing takes up a lot of room in young people's minds, and it really in itself is something that almost kills off that last little spark of childhood, because all of a sudden it is extremely focused on your body and how you look. It's focused on getting medical procedures. It's also focused, there's always some sort of sexual undertone in these communities. And it is in itself very robbing of a child's ability to just grow up and discover themselves naturally.
In my experience, there is a season of life where children are discovering God's creation and the beauty of it, and are learning about truths that have lasted over the course of time and will be foundational for their lives. And so it's very important that children, especially small children, have an opportunity, that they're in an atmosphere, they're in a setting where that good and true and beautiful is being communicated to them on a regular basis.
And so we really want to base our treatment and to affirm and to support and empower these youth, not to limit their participation in activities and sports, and even limit their ability to get gender affirmation treatment in their state.
The left, the progressive left, tends to portray the transgender movement as a movement of liberation. That there are people who are literally trapped in the wrong sexed body, and as society becomes more accepting of them and allows them to realize who they really are in public, then they're liberated and society will improve. Unfortunately, the empirical evidence points in a different direction. We know that suicide rates in societies such as Sweden, that have been very accepting of trans people for a long, long time, suicide rates among trans people run at roughly the same rate they do in places like the United States of America. So while the left portrays the trans movement as a movement of liberation, I would say it's a movement that is really preventing us from getting the proper humane help to people who need it. The phrase "I'm a woman trapped in a man's body" is quite fascinating. When you think about it, it carries with it a whole philosophical view of what it means to be a human being. First of all, the language of being trapped inside one's body immediately separates the real you from your actual body. In other words, the real you becomes some psychic entity, some psychological entity, and your body becomes, in effect, the equivalent of a spacesuit that allows you to live in this world and interact with other people.
So what you have here functionally is a kind of Gnostic practice. People who, find themselves in a body that's uncongenial to their true nature.
I would suggest that your body is not something you inhabit in the way that you might inhabit a house, or something you wear in the way that you might wear a coat. Your body is actually you. How do we get here? Well, it's not a short story. It can't be summarized in 30 seconds, but a moment's reflection would indicate that the path from, say, the Middle Ages to the present day, our understanding of what it meant to be a human in the Middle Ages to what it means to be a human today, has to involve a dramatic increase in the authority of our inner psychological feelings over our external circumstances, be they our geographical location, or in the case of transgenderism, our physical bodies.
And then when I was in my early 30s, right there around 2000, I actually started on the surgeries to fully transition from male to presenting as a female. The first one was vaginoplasty, the second one was labiaplasty. The surgeon performed the surgery, and coming out of surgery, I was bleeding. I was bleeding a lot from my new man-made female genitalia. My 2-week scheduled stay in the hospital turned into a 3-week stay. But the bleeding stopped, I recovered, and I went home.
But this idea of taking someone who's thoroughly male or thoroughly female, and who has a psychological disposition, they think, for being what they're not, is really problematic. And I have to say, it is the epidemic of our day. For example, if you take a look at Jacob and Esau, here were two men. One was a man of the field, a hunter, an outdoorsman. That's Esau. And Jacob was a man of the tent. So both men, both with distinctly different interests, but they weren't confused about their identity as men. Clearly, I'm not an expert in terms of exactly what hormones are being used there, but it doesn't take a genius to figure this out, that this is going to be very disruptive on the individual, to actually short circuit their normal biological pathway in favor of a perception that the individual has about themselves, a perception that is at best shaky, and quite frankly may well have been brought on by a conversation with others around them that individual sort of catches a vision. And so within that context, I think we're not doing these kids a service when we are actually going to stop a natural process that would solidify their identity in biologically speaking, that we would think that would be better to bring your psychology into conformity with that, as opposed to exacerbate the problem by giving particular blockers that prevent you from actually becoming who you're assigned to be.
And they gave you testosterone immediately.
Yeah, I essentially just made a phone call and said, I want to transition, and it was immediately given. I got a prescription and went to pick it up like a week later.
I would say the most dangerous part is rushing young people into things that have lifelong complications and consequences that they don't really have the capacity to understand. Because like at 16, I didn't understand what the long-term impacts of like removing my breasts or taking testosterone would be. I was still a child. I couldn't drive yet at the time. I was like, I think there needs to be some sort of barrier in there so you're not just walking in and getting hormones the same day. Like, and it really is one of those things where like there are like health consequences to this, but also stuff like it impacts your fertility. It cuts off healthy body parts that maybe, you know, if you just grow up, you will be fine. And it really is like taking those chances away from young people before they even have a chance to grow up.
I was still being identified as male. People were still calling me sir, he. So I had additional surgeries. I had rhinoplasty. And because my voice was so deep, I also had voice feminization surgery. I had a hard time during this transition because my employer at that time did not like that I was transitioning to female. So, needless to say that I was laid off of my job in Alabama, and I found another position many months later up in Joliet, Illinois. But I didn't want anybody to know about my past, and so I didn't make friends, because if you make friends and then you become good friends, what you're gonna do is share your past and your stories with other people. So I started isolating myself. After trying to live and to find my happiness that I believe was guaranteed me, and doing that for 7 years, I had more problems at that point than I did back before I transitioned, because my original problems didn't go away. All through this 7-year period, every time I looked in the mirror, I always saw Billy, the man, staring back at me. My eyes didn't lie. So, at that point, my second wife and I, we were having difficulties. She divorced me, and I moved back down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. In Baton Rouge, I was still presenting as female. At that point, I started my own company and was trying to make ends meet. And I was in another pit of despair. After doing everything that I thought I needed to do to find my peace, my happiness, my joy, and falling into this pit of despair, suicidal thoughts were coming back into my mind. So in this pit of despair, and I had a conversation with God. I was telling God, I've done everything that I could. I did my very best to live. I've tried to fix all of my problems. But I've absolutely made a complete mess of my life, and I'm out of options. I have no other place to go. Father God, I give my life to you. I give all of my problems to you. You have to fix them, and you have to fix me. And it was at that point that I actually had a thought come into my mind. I don't know if it was my thought or if it was a thought from God, but the thought was, now I have some clay to deal with. And since I had my own business, I had to learn how to manage my money. And I heard on the radio that at the church in Baton Rouge, there was a financial management program that was going to be starting, and people should sign up for it. So I did. And I started going to that class. And in going to the class, the facilitators of the class, they were part of a small group study, and the name of that group was the Bodybuilders. And he invited me, he and his wife invited me to join the Bodybuilders Sunday morning before church. I reluctantly said yes. And so the very first service our very first study I went to, it just so happened that they just finished one study and they were starting another study. And that study was entitled, "Have you done something you regret?" And I was like, "Really, Lord?" Because that was me. And the facilitator did a great job of introducing the study. And then he opened up the floor to everybody else. He's sharing that if you've done something that you regret and you want to share it, then please feel free to do so. This thought came into my mind that, go ahead, Billy, go ahead. Share this thought. Share what you have done that you regret. And I'm like, no way. I can't do that. They're going to run me out of here. I fully expected, after I finished speaking, for them to say, Billy, you change and then you come back. But what they did is everybody came and gave me a hug and they told me they're so glad that I was there. It blew me away. And so after that, I dove into the Bible. They started discipling me and mentoring me. They helped me grow. Having gone to Catholic school all my life and basically every year being in religious class, I learned that if I did my very best here on earth, God would give me His very best. I didn't know God. But in the Bodybuilders, I actually opened the Bible for the first time and started reading it and getting to know God. Larry and Carol offered to, they invited me to join their small group sessions that they had on Wednesday night. So I did, and it just so happened they were just starting a brand new study in a book, Taking Back Surrendered Ground, a book by Jim Logan, and it was on spiritual warfare. We learned that Jim Logan was going to share many of the things he learned in his counseling sessions with missionaries from around the world, and that he was going to carry 3 case studies as threads through the book. One of those case studies was about a man named Bill who was transgender. And it was in that book and in that study that I learned not every thought that we have that comes into our mind is ours. That our thoughts actually come from God, ourselves, and the devil. And then I saw examples within Scripture about this as well. And it was at that moment I finally understood how I got into this battle. That wasn't my thought. And in studying the Bible, I came across the verse, 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. It says that we are in a battle, and it's not a battle of flesh and blood, and that there's no instrument made by human hands that we can use in this battle, and that we're to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. I knew that I needed to take every thought captive, but how? That's when I came across Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. In view of God's great mercy, offer yourself as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to the Lord. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I started getting the thought, Billy, you need to detransition. You need to go back to presenting what you actually are, and that's male. God made a way for me to detransition. And so I came off of estrogen. I went on to testosterone. Things were good until my NASA lead called me into his office, and he shared with me, Billy, people are asking questions about you. They're seeing the changes in you, and they're wondering what's going on with you. With your permission, and during our next team meeting, I'd like to share with them what is going on with you. I said, well, thank you very much, but that was actually my responsibility. And at the end of the meeting, my NASA lead gave me an opportunity, and I shared what was going on, what I was doing. Everybody within my group embraced me, encouraged me, and stood by me. Even the gruffest men in the group, they were good with it, and they encouraged me. It's like, wow, Lord, you're making a way. I detransitioned. And there's a surgery called phalloplasty. And that surgery actually is a surgery for which female to male transgendered people would have. So I went through the surgery. Phalloplasty was the absolute worst surgery that I had out of all of the surgeries I had. It was bad. And it was after that surgery for which I recovered, and I was still working at NASA. And I was still doing triathlons, and I actually joined a group, Fellowship of Christian Athletes Endurance. And we would have meetings, and it was at one of these meetings where I met a lady. And I was interested in this lady. And so I got her name was Rachel, and I started texting her, sending her messages. And we became friends. We were doing races together, and I asked her out on a real date. We went out one evening. After that date, I said, there's something I need to share with you. And it was at that point, on that very first date, that I shared with Rachel all that I did. And her response to me was, let's be friends, which was a great response. So after that, we did more races together. We went on and did hikes together. And there was one hike around a lake, and afterwards there was a bench beside the lake, and we sat down on the bench, and Rachel tipped her head over and put her head on my shoulder. And I had this thought, maybe I can pursue Rachel romantically. And I did. And so Rachel and I got married. And at this point, I'd like to tell you that everything was happily ever after, but I can't do that. I was getting thoughts, you're a misfit. How could anybody love you? You're so scarred up and modified. I started to have this confusion in my mind again. It was like, how could God love me? Somehow, some way, and I don't remember how, a book came into my life. And that book was Victory Over the Darkness, written by Neil Anderson. I read that book, and that book made a lot of sense. It clarified more to me about the spiritual battle. The devil left for a period of time and came back and attacked me again in another area for which I was vulnerable in. And that was my identity. And that's the simple question, who am I? But what I learned in overcoming this last time is that my identity doesn't have anything to do with who I am or what I do. My identity has everything to do with God, who He is, and what He has already done, and what His Word says about me. I became free, and it was the truth that set me free. Jesus says that He is the truth. He's the life and He's the way. The world only offers temporary solutions at best. But what Christ gives us is permanent. There's a group of people that would also come around these individuals to encourage them. And what this does is all of a sudden, these confused children, teenagers and young adults, are getting reassured, and they're finding their acceptance, their significance, and their security in this new group of people, with the reassurance that they will be happy, that they will have their confusion straightened out, and this is what they need to do.
I'm somewhat empathetic to this, and I see people who might do these kind of things or take their children to these kinds of things, and I can say you probably have some sort of hurt or destruction in your life that made you believe these things, or some sort of great lie that led you to this place. And so what I want these people to know is that there's plenty of places where you can find out real information, plenty of places where you can get help, and plenty of people who are willing to talk to you about all of these kind of things and be respectful and courteous about it.
There's a significant amount of evidence that is coming out in journal articles about the harms of these medical interventions, the permanent harms. You heard a lot of the bad stuff, but I want to give you where I am now. I'm married to a beautiful woman. Her name is Rachel, and we've been together now for 12 years. I am completely free. I am happy, and I have joy. I have the happiness and joy that I was searching for when I was a younger man. But it's in love that I testify. I love these people. I do not want to see them to make the same mistakes that I have had and to suffer the consequences that I am presently suffering from. I got a scarred body. I'm surgically modified. I have to take weekly testosterone shots because my body can no longer make testosterone.
So the deal is that some of this transitioning that we talk about is really a deception in the mind and a mutilation in the body. And I think we have to call this what it is and move down the road with this in a more healthy direction.
The bottom line is that I received gender-affirming therapy when I was seeking mental health therapy, and that's my concern, is I did not receive that therapy. Back many, many years ago, I didn't know that I was a man. But now, I know that God did not make a mistake, that I was not born into the wrong body, and that I am a man, just the way God made me. He makes no mistakes.
What a friend we have in Jesus.